Orale, vatos! This is Lukadowski of WeAreChange.org, and wherever you look on social media or the mainstream media, you can't escape the ever-divisive, weaponized disinformation campaign meant to divide and conquer the human race. Almost everywhere you turn, you have just insane video footage coming out with, of course, special interests preying on the differences between the human race in order to, of course, benefit off of that. But during all of this chaos and insane moments, we actually had a pretty incredible, awe-stunning moment where people from the left, people from the right, specifically Black Lives Matter, and a right-wing anti-government pro-gun movement, starting with the word B that we can't mention, stood together in more ways than one. An incredible moment symbolized by many acts of unity that are really incredible that we're going to be talking about in this video, specifically with the independent journalist that is there, Ford Fischer of News to Share, whose video of this incident was deleted. The mainstream media covered this incident from, of course, a very untrue place. Their video is still up, it is still monetized, and it is absolutely filled with lies and divisive crap that we're going to go over. Now, Ford, you covered this event. What happened here? What do the people need to know about what just transpired a few moments ago?
Yeah, and so thank you for that very kind introduction. To be clear, yeah, so this is there is a word that we can't say that begins with a B that describes a pro-gun and anti-government movement. And that group was planning to have an open carry rally in Richmond, Virginia. They attracted somewhere between 100 and 200 people, most of them heavily armed. If you're familiar with the kinds of militia activists who show up to these sorts of things, it was almost like a very, very tiny version of like what you saw in Richmond in January. So these are people who are very concerned about government overreach and basically their gun rights. What I think was really interesting was that at the same time, Black Lives Matter activists showed up, also armed, and they showed up in smaller numbers. I would say about a dozen to 15 or maybe 20 tops. But I think people might traditionally think that those two groups would have been in opposition to each other. I think people would associate sort of an anti-government pro-gun group more with the right, although I tend to, when I interview those people, a lot of them will say that, oh no, we're not into the left or the right, we're kind of on our own. So whether or not it's appropriate to lump them into the right, we'll just say I think most people would interpret them that way. And Black Lives Matter, similarly, they would say, well, Black Lives Mattering should be something that everybody believes in, that should be universal. But similarly, people probably lump them into the left, and they probably tend to have left of center beliefs. So these are two groups that people might not necessarily expect to be rallying together. And when you see those two groups intersect on the streets, both armed, people might assume that they would have some kind of a clash or an argument, a fight, or at the very least, they might feel very tempted to call them counter-protesters. But what turned out happening was that they talked for a while, and they actually had a lot of common ground. And I think what was really interesting, the specific point of common ground for both of them is they're both very, very concerned about police brutality. And so they specifically were really focused around how there was a sort of right-wing militia type person who was killed in a no-knock raid named Duncan Lemp. And for Black Lives Matter, they were very concerned about the death of Breonna Taylor, which most people have heard about, who was also killed in a no-knock raid. Both of those two people allegedly were unarmed when police killed them in their sleep. So questions remain. We don't have body cam footage available of what happened, but both of those groups identify with those respective people, and they see some common ground, like the same thing happened to both of them. So it was a really interesting event how they came together, and there was actually even a small but not insignificant act of civil disobedience that they did, which was that there was a sort of area that was had a lot more shade. So if you're familiar with Richmond, there's kind of a big hill that has the Capitol on top of it. And so because of this event, the police shut off the entire Capitol Hill. You can't go anywhere near the Capitol. But there was sort of a shady area, and then there was like a very, very sunlit area. And this was a hot day yesterday. And so the protesters were told by police, you all have to go over to this area where it's really, really sunny. And basically, the protester said, or the leader of the protester said, I'm going to take my group over there because I don't want anyone getting arrested. But for the record, we believe that, government property, which is what the police were saying, this is government property. So you have to go over there. They said, well, but that's supposed to be our property, right? And so eventually they got kind of peeved about that predicament. And the leader of this thing said, I want to go to the shady spot. Let's all go together. This is going to be an act of civil disobedience. And they actually all linked arms, Black Lives Matter and this traditionally known as a right-wing group, linked arms, heavily armed, and they walked. They walked over a barricade and entered that space. And the police did not even touch it. The police didn't try to say anymore, don't do it. The police didn't attempt to arrest them. The leader kind of gave a speech saying, oh, they might come and put handcuffs on me, but they don't have enough handcuffs for all of us. And in the end, nobody got hurt and nobody got arrested. So it was a really interesting story. And I don't think you're going to find it on the mainstream media, but I have a feeling we're going to talk about that a little more.
Well, of course, especially with how the mainstream media covered this event, of course, comparing it directly to your honest coverage. One thing that I like about, you, Ford, and the work that you do is that you don't really editorialize anything. You let the camera speak for itself. You just let it roll and you let people represent their ideas themselves. And overall, when you really look at the real truth of the situation that we're all in, we all kind of want the same thing. Whether you're on the left and you criticize corporations or you're on the right and you criticize government, when you look at the commonalities, there's more things that, of course, we have in common than we don't. But when you look at the mainstream media, when you look at the social media algorithms, you, of course, have a lot of divisive, weaponized language meant to, of course, pin people against each other. And this moment that you documented, I mean, I'm watching some of the B-roll footage of it right now, people arm in arm together. There was another incident of a third group coming in. Can you tell us what happened? Who was this third group coming in? And there was another kind of sign of unity between these two groups, one starting with a B word that we can't say, and of course, Black Lives Matter. But there was another group. What happened before we talk about the mainstream media and their horrible coverage of this event?
Right. So there was another group that was having a 3-day long conference in Richmond that coincided with this event. And that group is called the Propertarians. And so that is sort of a contraction of the word property and libertarians. Although I would venture to guess that virtually everybody who would identify with libertarianism would oppose this group using that name. So this is a group that basically advocates the idea that you can boil down like every single moral question into property rights. But essentially their conclusion is, essentially white nationalist in nature. So there was this group of basically far-right individuals who showed up, and they kind of mixed into the crowd because at least they say they support gun rights. And so in that sense, they sort of wanted to participate. But something interesting happened, which was that one of the speakers was talking about how, they feel that the mainstream media misrepresents them as racist. And he said, how many of you all are racist? And then 3 people in the audience actually raised their hands, and they were all people who had come from that particular group. And some people kind of chuckled. I think most of them didn't notice that it happened, but it happened. Later, basically, as most of the people from the movement that we're not saying the name of moved into that shady area, the people from the Propertarians gave a speech in that first spot that they were giving most of the speeches at. And the speech, I don't really want to quote individual moments, but the speech was basically filled with white nationalist talking points. They were largely dog whistles. They were individual sentences that on their own might not necessarily kind of like raise a trigger or raise a red flag, but to somebody who has studied these things, they were very obvious references to white nationalist ideology. And the organizer picked up on what was going on, the organizer of the original event, as well as the Black Lives Matter people, sure understood what was going on. And so after that speech was being given for several minutes, the people from the right wing who were not with the Propertarians and the Black Lives Matter people actually marched back over to where that speech was being given, and they chanted, "White supremacy sucks, white supremacy sucks, white supremacy sucks." And so they got into sort of a verbal feud with the people who were listening to that speech. Some of the people from the original event were listening to the speech and seemed not to understand kind of what it was alluding to. So some of the people were questioning, "Oh, I didn't hear anything racist. What are you talking about?" So there was a little bit of argument that went on, and it very, very briefly turned physical. There was one kind of distressing moment in which one person's magazine dropped out of their rifle, and it's like, oh no, who's futzing with their weapon right now? But everything turned out okay. No shots fired. Nobody hurt. Nothing like that. But it was
Yeah.
interesting because when the issue of racism actually confronted them, by and large, the people on that of that right wing movement, and then the people with the Black Lives Matter movement came together to chant "White supremacy sucks."
Yeah, and this is important points that you brought up, that it was, again, a mainly peaceful pro-gun movement where people had a lot of arms with them. There's been other incidences and protests where, protesters accidentally shot, at the ground. That, of course, we covered a few days ago. There's been a lot of other incidences with people not practicing proper trigger discipline that, of course, we criticized very heavily on this independent YouTube channel. Because, again, when we're talking about, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, your inalienable rights, if you don't believe in it because of political party lines, you don't believe in it at all. But if you believe in it, that's a big burden, that's a big responsibility. And these two groups coming together, nothing happening. I mean, that's a testament of just the truth out there compared to, of course, what you see on the mainstream media. Which, when you look at CBS's coverage of this, local CBS affiliate, when they went down there and they did their package on this, they completely talked about this in a totally different way. Tell us how CBS covered this, since, of course, YouTube deleted your video, their video of this incident that is absolutely incorrect, because I watched parts of your live stream, and the videos that you put out, that's still up. YouTube is still allowing that to be up. They take down your videos. I mean, this is just crazy there, Ford.
Sure. So I want to compare and contrast the style, and I think it might illuminate the CBS thing. So I will circle back to that in just one second. When I went out there, so I was out there for about 4 hours. The thing started at about 8 a.m. It took a little while for them to really get together. Activist time is, usually a half hour late. But I was out there for 4 hours, and when I looked back on my live stream, it had been running for 3 hours and 40 minutes. So basically, my audience was able to see everything that happened, or everything that I saw. Of course, one camera is one camera. Something could have happened in a spot that I wasn't at, but basically everything that I saw is out there. And so when you have my summary videos online, you can see the context of every single moment. So I live streamed to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. YouTube actually took down the live stream in progress, and they notified me by email that we don't allow live broadcasts that include the handling of firearms. Okay, fine. I think that that's a silly policy, but if that's the policy, so be it. But then later, when I posted my 10-minute summary video of this situation to YouTube and Facebook, it stayed up. That was fine. But on YouTube, it got removed, and it actually gave me an email with the same exact claim. Live stream isn't allowed to have firearms, but it literally wasn't a live stream. It was just an uploaded video. And so what gives? I have no idea. I don't know if it was an error or if there's something nefarious about that, but it was just flatly, provably wrong. Anyway, by contrast, our good friends at CBS, I say with a tinge of sarcasm,
Here for freedom.
You do not get the benefit of seeing everything that they saw. Instead, they had a less than 1 minute long package. I think it was 59 seconds that attempted to summarize this situation. And so their story basically just described it as, there was a pro-gun rally that happened in front of the Capitol. They had a couple of little sound bites interviewing people with guns. They had a lot of B-roll of the people carrying guns around. Visually, like, any given frame of it isn't so different from my content. So for the sake of YouTube censorship or something, there's no reason that their video should have been allowed and mine wasn't. But their reporting was just wrong. They actually, in their video, they did not include the fact that there were armed Black Lives Matter protesters there. They did not include any of the conflict related to the proprietarians, and they didn't talk at all about the fact that a huge aspect of this rally was about a distaste for police violence, police brutality. They didn't talk about any of that stuff. And instead, in the last basically 5 or 6 seconds, the only lip service that they paid to the fact that Black Lives Matter people were there is they had two shots, a medium shot and a wide shot, of one Black Lives Matter protester standing on a barricade. They chose the one shot that showed like one individual who was not armed, whereas most of the Black Lives Matter people were, because basically everybody was. And this is the exact words they used. These are the only words that they said about the fact that that group was there. They said a group of counter protesters also showed up, as you can see, but nothing really developed beyond a brief verbal exchange. Of course, they said it faster than I did. I just kind of accentuated it just now. But they called them a group of counter protesters, which is not true because they were together. And they said, but nothing really developed. Really? That's interesting, because to me, I saw these groups literally marching, linking arms, armed together and finding common ground. They say nothing really developed beyond a brief verbal exchange. Brief is a funny word to use because I filmed them for 4 hours straight. So the question that it leaves me with is, did CBS show up for like 15 minutes and just kind of, they already knew the package they wanted to get, and they just kind of said, oh, okay, we'll do 2 interviews, we'll film a speech, we'll make a mention that we saw some Black Lives Matter people, and then we'll head out. Maybe they were just willfully ignorant, just lazy, or maybe they saw what was going on and just honestly wanted to turn it into something that it wasn't. Either way, it's total negligence journalistically. But that's their story. They had a 1-minute summary of that situation. It was completely incorrect. And it's still perfectly online on YouTube. No problems with the carrying of firearms, no community guidelines issues. And the cherry on top, if you go and watch that video, you'll probably see an ad at the beginning of it because it's even monetized. YouTube is paying them for that video, while mine that isn't filled with, BS, is not only demonetized, but completely taken offline.
Filled with hooey. We can't curse here, family-friendly show. We have to go through all these restrictions just by having an independent media organization channel that, by the way, as you've proven, does a lot better of a job than, of course, the mainstream media. And since, of course, there are CBS affiliates, they are the mainstream media, they get a pass on everything. Meanwhile, you even just touch on the topic. You say a word that they don't like, it's chop suey. You get cut off right away. I mean, we've been fully demonetized. I mean, what they're doing with the censorship, with the downranking, with the algorithms is absolutely insane because it provides people a larger disservice. The truth matters. The truth actually makes a difference out there. But when we get just constant propaganda, and whether that's because of laziness, incompetence, or criminality, either way, it's not good. Either way, these are major pillars, institutions of our society that are dishonest, disloyal, have no affiliation to human beings, but of course to the people that they serve. And when you look at major affiliates, especially, there's been a large number of incidences where they just read the script unquestionably, whether it's for Amazon, whether it's for another special interest group. A lot of local news affiliates just read what they're told to read by whoever you may say, the powers that be, or whatever money interest group or advertisement group has a big influence there. I mean, this is crazy. Ford, you've been seeing a lot of this on the ground. How do you see this kind of developing from here? Because I'm seeing this kind of divide and conquer agenda being promoted more and more to very dangerous levels. We've already seen so many violent incidences. I do believe that's in part because of social media algorithms and mainstream media kind of activism rather than journalism. Where do you see all of this going, unfolding from here? Because in my opinion, the symptoms that brought us to this bad point, they're not getting dealt with. with. They're only increasing in their severity. So for me, I don't think things are going to get better here. I think they're going to get worse, even though there's incredible moments of unity that you filmed yourself. How do you kind of see this landscape playing out
Right.
yourself?
So I tend not to do too much commentary or pontificating about the meaning of things. Whereas, I tend to, here's my live stream, here's what happened, here's the raw footage, and that's sort of how I like to present things and let other people analyze it. But I'll give this sort of nugget of analysis. I think that the problem largely is that both the media and politicians tend to benefit from perfect binaries, that there's a left and there's a right. And right, for the media, it's really easy to have a very simple division. Right, for Fox News, it's we're the right, everyone else is the left. The left is bad, the right is good. Right, and if you're a politician, the Republicans are bad, the Democrats are good, the Democrats are good, the Republicans are bad, whatever. Right, and so these dualities, these binary splits, are beneficial to kind of the powers that be, that shape your perception, the media and sort of the state itself, or the politicians that comprise the state. And so I think that sometimes you have a political crossover that the media and the politicians don't really find convenient for them, right? So it's I would not say that every Black Lives Matter person would endorse the kind of synergy that I saw yesterday by any stretch. I don't think it would be fair to say that that the Black Lives Matter and this group are now like one big thing. It's one thing that happened in one event in one place, and people can analyze or criticize whether that would happen generally. But I think that for the mainstream media, attempting to make sense of it is difficult for them, to place it in the context of the binary that they spend so much time presenting. Sort of similarly, I see a lot of people kind of in the media, they won't understand, for example, pro-gun leftism, right? I've filmed a lot of armed leftists, open carrying leftist militias, Antifa with guns, and Black Lives Matter with guns, and the media tends not to cover that because it doesn't really fit in. The sort of narrative is, oh, the right wing supports guns and the left wing is anti-gun, and that's a really easy narrative that benefits, for example, both sides of the political spectrum, right? The Republicans want to frame the Democrats as anti-gun to fuel their base and get gun owners to vote for them. And the Democrats want to say, oh, look at the Republicans. They're frothing at the mouth, pro-gun people. And, we Democrats are the only ones who are pro-gun control. And they won't really acknowledge that there are pro-gun people on their side. And so same for the media. It doesn't really do a whole lot for them to promote the idea that actually there's kind of some crossover. People are complicated. I think that's why you need more complete and independent videography and news coverage. And I think it's why when you look at the mainstream media, you're just not going to see that level of depth. Things are complicated. Media and politics don't want it to be.
It's like being stuck in a cyclone between two major trash heaps, and it's just reverberating and making the smell worse. I mean, some of it smells worse than others. I mean, obviously, of course. But again, you're not in a good position when you just have these two massive, stinky piles of trash, and then there's no way to escape of it with the cycle that's being kind of perpetrated. And you brought up a lot of important points, a lot of things to kind of pontificate, to think about, to really kind of delve into, because as you said, the world is not as black and white as people try to make it out to be. It's far more complicated. There's far more nuance. There's far more things that you should open yourself up to the possibility of things being, rather than, of course, having an opinion on something without actually knowing the full story. And as you said, independent media does that. Mainstream media, they're lazy, criminal, incompetent bums. Sorry, I can't help but get out some of my frustration, because it's just frustrating seeing the good guys get punished, and the bad guys, of course, get rewarded with monetization, with promotion, and it's just utterly insane. Ford, thank you so much for being there. Thank you so much for recording this. Where can people find you, and do you have anything else to say from your coverage of this event?
Sure. So you can find News to Share, the number 2 share, on Facebook and YouTube. It's at N2S Reports on Twitter. I'm Ford Fischer, FordFischer. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook as well. YouTube, I guess you're not going to see all of my coverage because YouTube took some of it down. But I still invite you to follow me on kind of all those places. I really believe in kind of diversifying where you put your content in case one social media takes it down and the other doesn't, or something like that. I think that one final just interesting anecdote from that day that really, really sums up some of what you were talking about, and what I've been talking about the complexity of it. There was a guy wearing a white guy wearing a rifle, a mask over his face, very the helmet, kind of full militia garb. And he was actually talking. He had a live stream himself going, and he was talking sort of on selfie mode with a guy wearing an "I Can't Breathe" ball cap, a Colin Kaepernick T-shirt, and 5 firearms. He had 4 handguns on him and a rifle. And they were talking about being united. And the guy, the militia type guy, said, "Well, it's not black versus white. It's all of us versus blue," meaning the police. And it was actually the guy wearing the Colin Kaepernick T-shirt who goes, "Well, it's not all blue, it's the bad blue." And he goes, "I've actually met some good cops." I thought that was a really interesting moment because intuitively you might think that the right side would be the one that's kind of pro cop or cop apologist or something like that. And in that particular moment, it was actually the Black Lives Matter guy who had a more sort of moderate approach to how he thinks of police versus the right wing guy. Again, that doesn't speak for the entirety of either of those movements at all, but it's the kind of moment that the mainstream media will not show you. And I think you really need that kind of live stream and raw footage to see the sorts of conversations that happen on the ground.
Couldn't agree with you more, Ford. Thank you so much for joining us here on this independent media organization. And of course, they deleted Ford videos. They delete our videos as well. That's why it's so important to share this video with your friends and family members. Without you, without the audience getting involved in independent media, we would not exist. We're only here because of you. And this is why I end most of my broadcasts by saying, love you guys. Stay tuned for more here on wearechange.org.